In a stunning strategic pivot that has shocked Western allies, Canada is rerouting its economic future. After President Trump launched a punishing trade war intended to bring Ottawa to heel, the unthinkable happened. Instead of capitulating, Canada shifted its vast reserves of energy and agricultural goods away from its oldest friend and toward America's greatest rival, China. A pressure campaign designed to ensure American dominance may have just handed Beijing one of its biggest strategic wins. How did a family quarrel in North America trigger a global power shift? For nearly a century, the map of Canadian trade had only one primary direction: south. The United States was more than a partner, it was the entire economic ecosystem. An intricate network of pipelines, railways, and supply chains fused the two nations into a single continental market. For Canadian energy, agriculture, and manufacturing, America was the default and often only customer. In this worldview, diversifying trade was a long-term aspiration, not an urgent necessity. The American market was seen as unbreakable, the bedrock of Canadian prosperity. But even as this deep reliance continued, Canada was acting as a loyal Western ally in the growing global confrontation with China. In late 2024 and early 2025, Ottawa took a hardline stance, slapping massive tariffs on Chinese goods, including a 100% duty on electric vehicles, to combat what it saw as unfair trade practices. Beijing's retaliation was swift and brutal. On March 20th, 2025, it hit back, targeting the heart of Canada's agricultural sector with 100% tariffs on canola and beans, and 25% on seafood and pork. At that moment, Canada found itself locked in a painful trade war with the world's second largest economy. It was a costly but principled stand, undertaken with the bedrock assumption that its most powerful ally, the United States, had its back. That assumption was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. The real shock wasn't coming from across the Pacific, it was about to come from across the border. On February 1st, 2025, the global trade order was shaken to its core. In a move of stunning aggression, the Trump administration declared economic war not on a distant adversary, but on its closest neighbor and ally. The White House announced a sweeping 25% tariff on virtually all goods imported from Canada, with a slightly reduced 10% rate for energy. The move was part of a broader offensive that also targeted Mexico and China, but the severity of the Canadian tariff sent a particular shockwave through the international community. In a baffling decision, the tariff levied on Canada, a treaty ally, was more than double the 10% initially placed on goods from China. The stated justification from Washington was a familiar refrain from the America First playbook. The administration argued that for decades, Canada had exploited its privileged access to the US market, benefiting from free trade while unfairly protecting its own industries. The tariffs were cast as a necessary evil, a powerful sledgehammer to shatter the status quo and force Canada into making major concessions. The strategic calculation behind the move was built on a single, stark reality: Canada's overwhelming economic dependence on the United States. With roughly 3/4 of all its exports heading south, the Canadian economy was seen by the White House as a hostage. The administration believed this dependence was a critical vulnerability that could be mercilessly exploited. By threatening to sever this economic artery, Washington was convinced that a desperate Canada would have no choice but to surrender quickly, accepting any terms offered to restore the flow of trade. It was a brutal exercise in hardball power politics, designed to reassert American dominance and fundamentally rewrite the rules of the North American partnership in Washington's favor. The White House was betting the House that Canada had nowhere else to go. In Ottawa, the American tariffs landed like a declaration of war. The timing was catastrophic. Canada was already engaged in a painful trade dispute with Beijing after taking a principled stand against Chinese trade practices. It had acted as a loyal Western partner, only to be ambushed by its primary protector. The sense of betrayal was profound. The move shattered a century of trust and forced an immediate agonizing reappraisal of Canada's place in the world. The core tenet of Canadian foreign and economic policy, that its relationship with the United States was unbreakable, had been proven false. In this moment of crisis, a new national strategy was born, forged in the fires of necessity. The long-term goal of diversifying trade was no longer an academic exercise. It became an urgent mission for national survival. And so, Canada executed a stunning strategic pivot. It turned to the only economy on Earth large enough and hungry enough to absorb the vast quantities of resources the US was now rejecting. Its adversary, China. The results were swift, decisive, and historic. In the months following the US tariffs, Chinese imports of American crude oil plummeted by nearly 90%. Simultaneously, Canada's seaborne oil exports to China surged to record highs, at times making Canada a larger source of crude for Beijing than the United States itself. It was a seismic rerouting of global energy flows. But the pivot didn't stop at oil. Facing a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum from the US, Canadian producers began diverting their exports to new markets in Europe, with the Netherlands and Italy becoming key destinations. In the agricultural heartland, where farmers were being squeezed by both US and Chinese tariffs, the Canadian government stepped in with enhanced financial support, providing a crucial buffer that allowed the industry to withstand the shock and aggressively seek new buyers in Asia. This wasn't a series of ad hoc reactions. It was a comprehensive, deliberate, and nationwide restructuring of Canadian trade. A country that had spent a century looking south was now, out of sheer necessity, looking west. This has thrown the North American relationship into a deeply unstable and unpredictable state. The Trump administration is cornered. Its primary weapon, the threat of tariffs, has been partially disarmed. Every new trade deal Canada signs with an Asian nation makes the American threat less potent. Yet, backing down would be a humiliating political defeat. For Canada, the situation is equally perilous. The pivot to China is a desperate measure, not a love affair. The relationship is transactional and fraught with risk, as shown by Beijing's own punitive tariffs on Canadian farm goods. While exports to China and other nations are growing, the stark reality remains that 68% of Canada's total exports still go to the United States. This ongoing dependence means Canada is walking a geopolitical tightrope, trying to build new bridges to the east without completely burning its oldest and most important one to the south. The ultimate irony is that Washington's attempt to isolate and weaken Canada may have achieved the exact opposite of its intent. It forced its ally to become more resilient, more diversified, and strategically closer to America's chief global competitor. Nowhere is Canada's perilous new path more visible than here, in the agricultural heartland of the prairies. For a canola farmer in Saskatchewan, the year 2025 began with a crisis. He was already reeling from a 100% tariff imposed by Beijing in late March, part of a 2.6 billion Canadian dollar retaliation that had crippled Canadian agricultural exports to China. His traditional market had vanished overnight. He looked to the south, to his historic partnership with the United States as his only reliable safety net. But then came the American tariffs. The US didn't just fail to help, it joined the assault, hitting Canada with a 25% levy that threatened to close off his last remaining major market. It was a moment of profound betrayal that forced a nationwide reckoning. This is the painful sacrifice at the center of Canada's pivot to China. To survive, the Canadian government stepped in with a lifeline, expanding its agri-stability program to backstop farmers and give them breathing room. But the long-term solution required an uncomfortable choice, turning back to the very nation that had just punished them. The pivot to ship oil and minerals to China is a strategic necessity born from American hostility. For this farmer, it means hoping that the same Chinese market that crushed him in March will become his savior in July. It forces Canadian businesses into a reluctant partnership with a global power they don't fully trust, all because their oldest friend turned its back on them. The cost for Canada is the loss of a century of predictability, forcing the nation to navigate a treacherous new path between two global giants, beholden to both and truly secure with neither. The tariffs were supposed to secure American industry and weaken its competitors. Instead, they have triggered a devastating blowback, undermining America's own long-term security. For a plant manager in Ohio trying to build the next generation of electric vehicle batteries, Canada wasn't just another supplier. It was the ultimate source of stability. The vast reserves of lithium, nickel, and cobalt in Quebec and Ontario represented a secure, reliable, and friendly supply chain right on the doorstep. This resource security was a priceless strategic advantage over China, which has to scour the globe for the same minerals. But the White House's trade war changed everything. Now, this plant manager watches as Canadian critical mineral projects, once destined for his factory, are being fast-tracked for export to his biggest competitor, China. The consequences are dire. After the US tariffs, Chinese imports of American crude collapsed by nearly 90%. That demand didn't disappear. It was filled by Canada. The energy that once solidified North American independence now strengthens America's chief rival. The lithium that Canada is developing for Asian markets is lithium that American industries must now fight for on the open market. The Trump administration's attempt to punish Canada has actively rerouted a secure overland supply of strategic resources and sent it directly into the hands of its primary global adversary. The blowback isn't a temporary price hike. It's a permanent strategic loss. A policy designed to make America strong has made its supply chains more brittle, its access to essential resources less certain, and its greatest economic adversary significantly stronger. A trade war designed to bend an ally to its will has backfired, shocking the West and triggering a global power shift. Forced to find new markets for survival, Canada executed a stunning pivot, rerouting its vast energy and resource wealth away from its oldest friend and towards its greatest rival. The campaign for American dominance has fractured the North American alliance, destabilized a century of partnership, and handed Beijing a massive strategic victory without firing a single shot. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.